Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the first part thereof for the 30th of August 2025. I get some strange criticisms on my channel, such as a request for me to change my name, to not use my name. Someone said this morning, "Slava Ukraine, but can you stop using MS in your name? It sounds Ponzi." I'm like, sorry, it's my name. Just to let you know, the reason I use MS, I do have multiple sclerosis, but I don't put MS in there because I've got multiple sclerosis. It's called nominative determinism. Somehow my name's dictated what condition I'd get. No, I put that because there's a famous, much more famous than me, football commentator in the UK who commentates on television called Jonathan Pearce. And whenever I started writing, a dozen years ago plus, I started using the MS in order to differentiate me, because someone did actually critique me online and write a whole article trying to critique my positions. Very poor, and I took them down to Chinatown. But they put a picture of the football commentator that they'd just taken off Wikipedia or whatever. I was like, yeah, I definitely need to differentiate myself between them. That's why I have the MS there. It's not because I'm Ponzi. Although, if I am Ponzi, whatever. So 850 personnel lost is, and of course these are the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. Very similar to what we've seen over the last however many weeks, where we have fairly average personnel losses below 1,000 now. 6 tanks, and actually, well, I say fairly typical. There's a real uptick in troop-carrying AFVs to 19 troop-carrying AFVs. I don't even know if that's at the daily average now, because that's dropped. It used to be about sort of 25 to between 20 and 25 there. Now I think it's probably back down to around sort of 20 or so. But anyway, many more troop carrying AFVs lost in the last 24 hours, and 6 tanks is a few more than we've seen. 47 artillery systems is fairly typical. It's well above the daily average, so the Ukrainians still are treating those at quite a snip. Quite a lot of drones last night. We have another huge night of drones attacking into Ukraine that again tells us something. Everything tells us, paints a picture of what's going on. 106 vehicles and fuel tanks, that's fairly typical, above 100. So those are the figures. We don't have an Andrew Perpetual loss list as far as I can see. I do have a comment from someone who works in the basement, in Andrew's basement, as it's known, working on the figures. So this is Brandon Clark saying, "Hello team." And yesterday we talked about how Andrew and others, no doubt, in his team collate the loss statistics in terms of vehicles and equipment loss, but also he adds up the Russian deaths from the videos, derived from the videos on a daily basis. And I was talking about how that gives us some kind of indication. He says, "Hello team." Brandon, reporting from Andrew's basement, just a bit of perspective. The Russian death figures reported are likely very below the realistic figures, which is absolutely, I personally never said they were anything like fully representative. They just give us a sort of trend indication, but just to give us clarity, the Russian death figures reported are likely very far below the realistic figures. The reports are based on obviously observable lethal strikes. There are many other strikes we see that would eventually lead to a KIA, which are not reported. Add to this the fact that all of our data comes only from instances found in videos published by the respective units. I don't know how many strikes go unpublished, but one would assume that the majority are not released to the public. Absolutely. And this is why I've always said that the figures presented here, the one that's the most guesstimate, the most like a guesstimate, is the personnel figure, because if you're a unit and what happens is that each unit has to provide evidence of their successes to their bosses, and the bosses provide it to general staff, and the general staff collate the figures. So there is a process. With the tanks, you're going to have videos of 6 tanks burning in a field, right? And you're like, yeah, okay, yep, that's a tank. That's a tank. That's a tank. So all the units are giving us their data. We've got 6 tanks. Okay, bish, bash, bosh, 6 tanks. 850 personnel is going to be derived from, here's a strike on a building. We think maybe 10 people are inside. Then it's like, well, I don't know how many of those died, how many were injured, how many came out unscathed. So we're going to guesstimate, I don't know, 7, 8, or whatever. It's a massive spectrum of possibilities there with the figures. And so it's the same for a tank. So if you've got an APC or a tank driving across a field, you're not quite sure how many people are inside. Okay, the APC gets blown up on a mine. video cuts out? Do you know how many people got out? Do you know how many people died, etc., etc.? So there will be an element of guesstimation in the personnel figures, which is absolutely unavoidable as far as I'm concerned. And therefore, we should treat the personnel figures slightly differently to how we treat the materiel figures in terms of kind of skepticism and whatnot. And this is the same for, elements of this when you're looking at actual videos of people dying. Yeah, okay, so we can pretty much be sure that those people didn't survive, but how many of these videos are published, and all the other issues you might have. So as far as the raw numbers of people we see getting killed, he says, I can only speak for myself. So I talked about the psychological impact of doing work like this. He said, I can only speak for myself, but it is very high. No, it's not easy to watch. I am at least able to compartmentalize this and move on with the work of geolocating the strikes. Every now and again, I'll see one that gets at me for one reason or another, however. Thanks as always, JP, for your work to get the news out. Many people out there, and myself included, very much appreciate it. I appreciate the work you're doing because you guys are like the unsung heroes for data collection and hopefully then synthesis and analysis. And so yeah, really, really important. Thank you, Brandon, for being in the basement and doing the work that you do, and to Andrew and his team there. Okay, Yakub Yanovsky talks a little bit about personnel here by saying Ukrainian volunteer Serhiy Stenenko, who's a good source, does a lot of fundraising and really good work, who supplies frontline units with drones and drone interceptors, said air defense crews are being reassigned to infantry again, including interceptor drone operators. Amid rising Shahed attacks, reassigning air defense crews looks like self-sabotage. If that is true, that is a real issue. It's not only reflective of a problem for the Ukrainians in terms of recruiting, but also shows that, things are challenging and they need infantry on the front lines more than they need air defense crews, and they really need air defense crews. Sorry if I'm speaking a little bit quickly. I have to take my boy to football and it's like an hour away. Yes, we do have some loss stats coming from Oryx today in the absence of Andrew Perpetua's stats. And actually interesting set of stats here. So we've got 36 Russian losses. And remember, it doesn't include motorcycles, buggies, cars, SUVs, all that kind of stuff. This is just kind of typical combat assets and trucks and whatnot. And the Ukrainians have 5. So this might be an anomaly day, but there's a really big difference there in terms of losses. The ratio is 7-1 pretty much. So we have we've got 4 tanks, BMPs and APCs and whatnot, so infantry fighting vehicles and APCs. We've got, 7 of those, 8 of those, and then we've got some mobility vehicles, and then down to quite a few howitzers. We've got 2 destroyed BM-21 Grads, so multiple launch rocket systems. We've got a transporter, erector, launcher and radar for the Buk air defense system taken out. So pretty high value equipment there, and regular sort of combat assets against just 5 bits of kit here. But it has to be said, so we've got a damaged R360 Neptune launcher. We've got a couple of UGVs, so I forget them. We've got a Kirpi 2, that's a Turkish provided mobility vehicle, MRAP actually. And then we have the Project Laguna reconnaissance ship damage. So we don't know the outcome to both of those high value bits of kit, the Neptune launcher. And actually, I don't know how valuable a Neptune launcher is, because it depends if the missile propels itself off the launcher, in which case the launcher is just a kind of platform thing. And the missile does its own, it's kind of has a launch module that might get ejected or whatever. Or whether the like a surface-to-air missile telar, right? That is an expensive piece of kit where you have the tubes and the vehicle and so on and so forth. But you look at launch for some of these bits of kit, like the FP1 drone, and I think even the Flamingo might have very simplistic launchers. So actually, I say it's a really high value bit of kit. I'm not 100% sure, but let's assume it is. And that ship certainly is. Now, we heard a little bit more about the ship, but there's a lot of unknowns here. So the Navy is being somewhat keeping their cards close to their chest, should we say. The death toll from the occupiers' attack on the Ukrainian Navy ship in the Odessa region in the Danube River estuary has increased to 2. So 2 have died, says Platenchuk. Several servicemen were injured, several more listed as missing. The Navy does not confirm the information about the possible sinking of the ship. So the Russians claim they sank it. There are claims it rolled onto its side. It's going to be in a heap of bother because that was a fairly sizable explosion that took place when it was hit. So that was a really bad day at the office for the Ukrainians in terms of losing a few key bits of equipment. But actually, on the same day, the Ukrainians came out with a list of $250 million worth of equipment that the Alpha Group had taken out, and then an S-400 lost in Crimea as well. And indeed, I think there's another S-400 lost overnight last night. We'll get to that in a second. In fact, before we get to there, let's go to what the Russian Defence Minister Belousov has said. I don't hear too much from him, but he has said that the military has increased contract recruitment targets to support offensive operations, which is French for we've lost a lot of people, we need more of them, in my opinion. And things are desperate and we need to take more land and we need to be in the ascendancy when negotiations are kind of locked in. So we need more people. He added that over 10,000 motorcycles, ATVs and buggies will be purchased to increase the speed of tactical group movement. Really significant there because that is we're back to, right. The Ukrainians degraded, attrited an absolute ton of traditional combat assets, tanks, APCs, IFVs, right? And the Russians were forced, I think, to use less traditional assets and more unarmored assets, so stuff that won't protect their troops, like motorcycles, quads, buggies, SUVs, and larders, right? And they were forced to do that. And so you look at them, you think, oh, look at the poor state the Russian army's in. They're using these crappy vehicles to do their attacks. But then they realized that some of those vehicles conveyed an advantage. So using motorcycles is good because they're quick. They can avoid mines. They don't always avoid mines, but they can avoid mines. And they are more difficult to take out in terms of you used to have an APC with 20 Russian soldiers stacked on top, and you hit that with it hits a mine, or you hit it with an ATGM or with artillery and drones, and that thing takes out, all the people with it, or a lot of the people with it, right? Now you've got 20, those 20 people are riding individually on motorcycles. You have to hit all 20 motorcycles to have the same effect of a single excellent hit previously. In other words, there are advantages to using motorcycles, quads, buggies, and even sometimes, SUVs and whatnot. So horses for courses, but the Russians are able to break through the drone corridor defensive lines sometimes because they are on these light unarmored vehicles and racing through the drone corridor. So when you look at what Belousov says here, is it because they can't make IFVs at the moment at the levels that they need, or is it because these genuinely convey an advantage and they want motorcycles, ATVs and buggies over IFVs? And there's an interesting discussion to be had there. So the ISW talks about this. Russian Defence Minister Andrei Belousov gave a major speech at the Russian MOD Collegium and gave an update on the 10 priority directions for the Russian MOD. He discussed Russian battlefield progress in Ukraine and exaggerated Russian gains in recent weeks, of course. Belousov indicated that the Russian MOD has shifted its priorities to produce light vehicles over heavy armoured vehicles, reflecting Russian battlefield tactics since winter 2024 to 2025. So that suggests it is a desire to move. There's a change of tactics to move towards light vehicles rather than heavy vehicles. Belousov stated that Russia continues to focus on developing its unmanned systems forces and production capacity. And we'll actually look at that in terms of the strikes last night. Belousov indicated that the Russian MOD is expanding its efforts to digitize Russian recruitment, likely as a part of a wider effort to augment Russia's administrative capacity to handle conscription and mobilization processes. And they're going to look at his speech in more detail at a later date. So let's look at some equipment destruction. Ukraine has destroyed Russia's newest MLRS. I have not even heard of this, the Vozrozhdeniye or Resurrection, capable of firing BM-21 Grad rockets. So it takes the same ammunition as the old BM-21 Grads, but is some kind of updated, unveiled in 2024 piece of kit. One of those has taken one for the team and will require some form of resurrection in order to be operational. Okay, now as I hinted, according to unconfirmed reports, Ukraine struck a Russian S-400 air defense system north of Armyansk Perekop in occupied Crimea. To the extent that the damage is still being verified. So this is Perekop. This is on the kind of top left-hand side of Crimea, whereby there are a few places to get across. You've got Henichesk over on the right-hand side, top right, and then you've got Armyansk over on the left-hand side, and you have these choke points. So if you can hit the railway bridges and the road bridges and the roads here, that you really are affecting Crimea's ability to, or the Russian ability to get stuff out of Crimea and into Crimea. Anyway, that's not what's gone on here, but just sort of mentioning that, we have an S-400 possibly added to the loss lists for the Ukrainians, so some success there. So I say loss list for the Ukrainians, I mean what the Ukrainians have done to the Russians. Ukrainian artillerists, says France Stefan Gardi, say that they aren't using howitzers any less because of drones. So, okay, this is something I have been thinking about, and I've mentioned it a couple of times to you. I have seen much less evidence of artillery usage by both sides. So we used to see artillery blowing up around vehicles as they're driving. We're seeing fewer vehicles driving through fields, heavy vehicles, as already mentioned. And we used to see these pockmarked fields full of shell holes and craters, and then like more shells banging off around this stuff. And I just see much less evidence of artillery being used. So I see far fewer fields that are just covered in pockmarks and craters. And I see less video evidence of the actual explosions and whatnot. But Ukrainian artillerists are saying they aren't using howitzers any less because of drones. They are telling the US and other allies that big guns, they do retain some key advantages, not least greater firepower. So you get much greater kinetic impact, and also the explosives on a shell are obviously much greater, much bigger than a drone. But the thing is, a drone costs a fraction of the shell. So for the same price as a shell, you can use however many drones and then pinpoint those drones better. So, but there are still reasons why you might want to use artillery. And it's interesting they're saying we're not using them any less. I've seen less evidence of them being used, but the claim here is that we're still using them to the same degree. So interesting. A bit of interesting information about our new Ukrainian counter-battery tactics, says Visioner. Now, this is so timely, because the other day I showed you I think it was a BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket system getting hit 50 kilometers behind the front lines, behind the Dnipro River on a coast somewhere near, I don't know, Skadovsk or whatever, in the Kherson Oblast. And what was interesting about this, it was just parked on the side of the road. It got hit by a drone, and then fire suddenly started on the top of the cabin. And it didn't look like it had ignited anything to do with the munitions on board. I was like, that's really interesting, because that ended up doing a lot of damage. So sometimes a kamikaze drone will hit a piece of equipment, kind of blow up, but it doesn't ignite anything, doesn't cause any explosion. And then actually it's just really a kind of almost not a kinetic, it's an explosion, but just kind of damages like metalwork and whatnot, and doesn't then continue and last and burn the whole thing out. And we saw this drone hit, and I said, wow, there's flames right across the top of that. Was that drone carrying some kind of incinerant? Is that a word? Something, accelerant, some kind of liquid that will burn. Like, that looked a bit different. And then a few people on the thread were saying, no, bad, yeah. There's a bit of discussion. It turns out that they are using drones. Now, I don't know if that was an example of it, but they are using drones to do this. So in these videos, I noticed the use of drones similar to the Molniya, but their warhead contains an incendiary mixture. When it detonates, the enemy position is engulfed in flames. Boom. Since few on the front line have fire extinguishers, positions sometimes burn out along with the artillery pieces. And even if the gun itself doesn't burn, its incendiary mixture burns a path for the following drones. So not only does it burn stuff around it, and then that can ignite the artillery ammunition. Obviously, howitzers don't really burn, right? They're big bits of metal, and you've got to hit them right to cause fundamental damage to them, to some of the mechanisms. But if you are burning some of the area, then actually it's not so much about destroying the equipment there, but actually setting off a fire that then tells the other drones that are flying into this area where you are struck. So that's an interesting, I guess, collateral to this. I consider the tactic effective because no protective netting can save against fire, and sometimes not even a closed dugout. So there are 4 separate videos here suggesting that they are using fire. Like, look at that. That's exactly what I was talking about with that top of the BM-21 Grad the other day. These drones are definitely containing some kind of flammable liquids or something. But seeing that more and more in these videos, and that seemed to explode before it even hit the ground there, flaming. You can see the flaming liquid hit the ground from above. So anyway, that's happening there. So that is definitely a thing, and that kind of gives me a sense of validation from my kind of weird speculations that I make. Right, okay. What else do we have? Not for the first time this week, we see a massive. Did I show you one the other day? There was another one of these TM62, these anti-tank mines, those round anti-tank mines, famous ones, being stored in one single place, and then that being hit by a drone, and kaboom, you have a massive explosion. Wow. So that is how to do it when it comes to stockpiles of munitions. Now, talking about stockpiles, here's a Russian motorcycle being used as a transport for drones, and a worrying amount of drones, this, isn't it? And this shows you that the Russians have a lot of drones, as the Ukrainians do as well. Both sides are building, procuring, and using drones at phenomenal rates. And there is a motorcycle with them loaded on the back. My goodness. Now, this is kind of a Russia on fire incident that was well reported yesterday. I don't know if it's got anything to do with the war per se. The Russians claim it was there was some decompression that happened at this petrol station, blah, 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 in Dagestan. Now, we had seen already, I've reported 2 petrol stations exploding in Grozny over the recent months. Here's another one exploding, and it's just something about massive explosions that like it's horrible and it's not good for the environment, but it's a bit like watching a big action film and you're thinking, oh, that really is what they look like. That is a petrol station exploding, and it is pretty striking. And just look at that. So that's a petrol station exploding in Dagestan. Now, petrol is hard to come by in Russia, so any incident like this is going to hurt even more, even if it's just a complete accident. I doubt the Ukrainians are going to be doing anything like blowing up a petrol station deep in Dagestan for some kind of warlike reason. But you never know. Then we hear this morning the market is on fire in Volgograd. Don't know if this is kind of hashtag Russia on fire. It looks pretty significant, or is a result of drone debris or whatever. But Volgograd, not too far from Ukraine. There were wide-scale strikes last night, so who knows? And then just on the front line, just a quick talk about Kupyansk. And in fact, I've already watched. Scruffy Tales has done his video already on this. I was seeing last night there were claims that the Ukrainians have counterattacked in Kupyansk. Kupyansk was one of the areas I was particularly worried about. The Russians were moving down to the northwest of the town or the city, and actually pretty much to the west of it. But Scruffy was saying that, look, this is actually a bit of a kill zone, and the Ukrainians have high ground all around it, both in the city, down here, and here. They're kind of moving down a valley. And there are some claims that the Russians were taken out as they came down into that area, and the Ukrainians have liberated the areas that the Russians are pushing into. Don't know yet, needs way more confirmation. Major mappers have not confirmed that at all, but it could be that the Ukrainians have fought back and repelled the Russians in Kupyansk, in an area that I was most worried about. That's the only reason I've included that today. Right, okay, on to distant strikes. And the Russians have committed Ukraine to another night of aerial horrors. And I think the Russians have probably scaled their production back up. So I think they have reacted to, I think they were firing fewer drones and missiles, and as a result of the Ukrainians hitting part of the production process and the supply chains. But now we've had a couple of nights of really significant strikes in the last week alone. And I think the Russians have probably sorted out their supply chains, and the Ukrainians will need to hit them again. Russia hit Ukraine 34 times in the night, but also from almost 600 weapons launched. That's 34 from, I don't know what number that's derived from. Anyway, the air defense did exceptionally well last night. Again, we had these huge swarms of drones and missiles. And when they are sent against Ukraine's most heavily defended places, whether that be Kiev or Lviv, Ukraine generally does a pretty good job. But the problem is 5% of a massive number ends up quite a big number. So where the previous night we had, what was it? It was only a 60% interception rate or something like that. 22 out of 60 something drones got through, right? And that's a really bad interception rate. But actually, you got far fewer drones, so it's not so much of a problem last night. Much better interception rate, and that equates to actually a fairly similar amount of drones getting through. So I talked about 22 the night before. There you've got 27 drones getting through. Interception rate phenomenal, because they're flying mainly against the best defended places. 8 ballistic missiles, 6 of them shot down. That is exceptionally good. So that Ukrainians have got to be pretty pleased with that, as horrific as these attacks are. And 37 cruise missiles, 32 shot down. So I think a really good night for interception, but a hellish night for the Ukrainian defenders. People in the metros in Kiev are not going to be happy. Main focus of the attack were Lutsk, Rivne, Dubno, Kiev, Dnipro, Zaporizhia, and Pavlohrad, and also positions near Pokrovsk were attacked with drones too, with Shahid drones. So as you can see, quite a few places fairly close to the front line, Dnipro and whatnot. Is that Pavlohrad, Zaporizhia, and that I'm not sure if that's Pokrovsk there. Then you have Kiev up here. You've got Ivano-Frankivsk, a few sent there. Then you've got Rivne, Dubno, and Lutsk as well in the west. So one would assume the industrial military complex has been targeted in the west by the Russians, and then it looks like they were targeting Khmelnytsky as well, and maybe Starokonstantinov Air Base too. That's a very common place to attack. Zhytomyr maybe a little bit too. So a really wide-ranging attack last night, but the Ukrainians did a good job of defending against it. But there are all, of course, what goes up must come down. So even when you've got 600 drones almost being sent into Ukraine, right? 537 drones, 510 shot down, but all those 510 are going to fall to the ground and cause damage. And if that happens in an urban area, you've got a lot of damage being done. So even with successful interception, you've got people dying, you've got infrastructure being taken out, civilian, commercial, industrial infrastructure. Worst affected place in Russia's latest missile attack was Zaporizhia, says Tim White this morning. 1 civilian killed there, 22 injured, boys aged 9 and 10, a girl aged 16 among the wounded. There's a haunting feel to the video in the aftermath of the location. So, massive destruction there. A poor dog left thinking, what is going on? 14 apartment buildings and over 40 private houses have been damaged. Russia did hit energy infrastructure, particularly electricity, could be off for quite a while. Some households lost their gas as well. As you can see, just really widespread civilian destruction there in many places around Ukraine. And then you can see like the destruction to a apartment building here with the stairs, showing you what it looks like to be caught in a strike in an apartment building. So lots of footage coming out. Russia marked the passing of 2 weeks since the red carpet treatment in Alaska in its usual way. So the idea is that 2 weeks is running out, and this could be some kind of symbolic attack to say, nah, not really bothered. After promising Trump yet again to a face-to-face meeting with Zelensky, having already stalled for 5.5 months, the indicted war criminals showed Trump's complete impotence, says Tim White, and then shows the map there. Officials in Dnipropetrovsk remain, as usual, quite guarded about the damage there, but details are emerging. Infrastructure facilities were damaged in both Dnipro and Pavlohrad as fires broke out after the arrivals. Smoke was still rising well into the morning. Private houses were also hit in Dnipro. There was ample warning about the impending strikes with both drones and missiles, so thankfully no one was injured in the region, which is pretty phenomenal given the amount of damage that was done. Russia again attacked the Apollo shopping center in Dnipro. The other picture shows many of the bits of metal found across the city this morning following Russia's earlier attack on Ukraine. So commercial property being possibly targeted or maybe hit accidentally, who knows, but it's still, Russian horrific attacks. And then Ukraine attacked themselves, and that's what we're going to talk about next. Don't know if there's nothing else there. So we'll go on to what Ukraine achieved. And you had the typical maps coming out last night. I saw a map from Drone Bomber showing some really interesting paths of the drones, and they were all along the front line. So, and not the front lines, the borders, right into every single oblast that you can imagine them going next to Ukraine, and attacking a lot into Crimea as well, and actually across Crimea down into Krasnodar. So just to put that on the map, so you got you can't really see Vazov here, and then you got the Kerch Bridge just at the bottom there, and then Krasnodar is to the right, just below this Rostov Oblast. But anyway, the Ukrainians doing another wide-ranging attack that we have only some information about, and the information really is coming out mainly about the two big refinery strikes. So Rostov was hit. There were fires there, but the main impact appears to have been in Krasnodar. Krasnodar oil refinery produces 3 million tons of light petroleum products per year. Gasoline, diesel, aviation fuel takes part in supplying Russian troops with fuel. This was, I think, the most successful the Ukrainians were last night in terms of the two places here. I think Syzran, which has already been hit twice in the last month, was a smaller fire. It looks quite major there, but actually from a distance and this morning, it seems to be one kind of area of it that's burning. So I don't think there was as much damage. I thought Syzran had closed down and there wasn't as much oil there. They had hit that with a bunch of drones the last time, and there were no fires. They were just taking out bits of one presumes the processing equipment. Syzran oil refinery processed up to 8.5 million tons per year, produces gasoline, diesel, aviation kerosene, fuel oil, and bitumen. So both of these places being hit. There you can see the really significant fire at Krasnodar. That's why I was saying this. I think Krasnodar certainly looks more successful for the Ukrainians. Located at the southern end of the Russian city of Krasnodar. So that refinery has been rather hot. So Special Kherson Cat details these strikes in a thread. Let's just update that and look at it. 2 Russian oil refineries targeted Krasnodar and Syzran. Krasnodar, as heard, has a capacity of 3.1 million tons. Syzran 7 million tons, which was already hit twice this month. Syzran. So there's Krasnodar burning brightly there in a huge fire. Far in the territory is Syzran. There seems to be that one area by some of those red and white chimneys. As you can see again, not there here. Where are they? There is another picture. I think I have it here. Yeah, that's where you can see it. So burning just to the left this morning of those chimneys. So I don't think that's as the fire there's as destructive or as wide scale as the fire at the Krasnodar refinery, but that's just my supposition there. That video, I won't play it because YouTube doesn't like explosions, particularly the sound of them. So but that she screams in that, and you can understand why. Right near to her place, that there's an explosion. You can hear the sorry, I am still dying a little bit, and I won't have time to edit that one out. So the sound of these drones is significant as well. And that could tell you what kind of drones they are. The Krasnodar oil refinery burns this morning still after the strikes, and that the burning of that refinery, as I mentioned, looks just still more significant in the morning than Syzran. Additional footage of the fire at Syzran, though. I mean, yeah, both of them are going to be hurting, right? Success with the Ukrainians there. There is the Syzran oil refinery. We also hear that aviation fuel is burning in Sevastopol. So Crimea was, as it always is, heavily targeted last night, and that there is evidence here and there of things on fire. Storage for aviation fuel burning in Russian-occupied Sevastopol is the claim from Tendar there. We're going back the other day to the Kuybyshev oil refinery in Samara. That's halted operations after a massive Ukrainian strike there. That was when at least 29 drones targeted the facility, something I've been calling out for a long time, which is lots of drones hitting the same facility at once, causing 7 fires and injuring 1 worker. Key units, including crude processing, hydrogen production, pipelines and fuel tanks were hit. And it's going to be interesting to see whether the refineries last night are going to be fundamentally taken out of action. Now, when Kiev was hit the other night, there were several people there. Ben Wallace, the former Defence Secretary for the UK government, was there. And here we have Pastor Mark Burns, who was there as well. He is the spiritual advisor to the White House. He came over to Ukraine and changed his opinion on Ukraine by experiencing it firsthand. He was a kind of typical MAGA Republican, sort of siding with Russia, and then had this road to Damascus moment. And this is, as horrible as it was for him to experience this, it's very useful so that he can take that back to the US and communicate that to people from a first-hand experience point of view. So this is what Pastor Mark Burns said. Watch this video. That was filmed by Reverend Joel Tenney from my hotel. I was just, so he had just left. He had been given the medal, and he had just left, I think, the night before or whatever, the strike on Kiev the other night. And again, there was one last night as well. So Putin is killing civilians, he says. Just hours after General Kellogg and I left our hotel in Ukraine, Russian missiles rained down just outside, striking apartment buildings filled with civilians. Civilians were killed. Entire families shattered. This was not war. This was murder. We were just there. This could have been us. But instead, it was innocent people, mothers, fathers, little ones. It may appear that the time for talking is over. And God forbid, if Russia keeps pushing, President Donald J. Trump may have no choice but to unleash the full might of the United States military to end this evil once and for all. Let there be no doubt, America is watching and God is watching. We will not back down. We will not stay silent. We will not let tyranny win. That's the kind of rhetoric that we really need from people within, particularly the MAGA Republican landscape information spaces, right? Really useful that he had that experience, or, was staying at a place that was subsequently hit, and another one of his colleagues was there. Really important. And adding on to that, it's interesting that US envoy to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, talking about these ERAM missiles, 3,350, that have just been sold to the Ukrainians, funded by Denmark, Netherlands and Norway, $825 million worth of them. He said that Washington is providing Ukraine with, or selling to other nations, with deeper strike capabilities likely to be used inside Russian territory. So this is interesting that you've got an explicit permission here from Whitaker, it appears at least, to use those missiles deep into Russian territory. He says, however, this is not an official White House statement or confirmation, so take it with a pinch of salt. But someone, a White House employee, if you like, has said that deeper strike capabilities likely to be used inside Russian territory are going to be at Ukraine's fingertips. Right. I'm going to include a little. Normally, I'd leave this to the end of the video, but sometimes also put it in the strike parts. It's very easy to talk about these strikes, and last night in Kiev, hellish, but actually, I think even worse the other night, because it was more spread around last night. But the other night when Kiev was really hammered, and we had 23 people died. I think the number is maybe 24 now, and there are still, I think, some missing. Just to remind you, the people who died were real people with real children, or they were themselves real children. It is unconscionable that the Russians continue to do this. Russians murdered 2-year-old Angelina and a 24-year-old mother, Nadia, in Kiev the other night. And then we have this. This is a montage of people who died there. Their lives were tragically taken by Russia in Kiev on August 28th. These are the victims. And it's worth reminding ourselves that, you know, women, children, men alike, old, young, just is horrific. You know, war is horror. War is horrific. But the way that Russia is conducting this war is particularly heinous. So I think we need to remind ourselves of the human nature of this, of the people themselves, their faces, just to connect with what has happened. And I then want to, this kind of annoyed me, I have to say. It genuinely annoyed me. So Bertold, who was very much a supporter of the channel, now takes it upon himself to kind of criticize everything I do and say. So yesterday, I right at the end of the video, at the very end, an hour, you have to watch an hour of video. I put a video of a dog pining for its dead owner. And because it's quite emotional, and again, it connects us to the war in a way that we need to be connected, because otherwise these are just statistics that look like this and look like that. Yeah, brilliant. I can show you numbers all day long. I can report the numbers, but I don't think that's doing justice to what these numbers represent, which is the death of people, the unnecessary death of people. So I put that dog pining for his owner right at the end of the video, just to give you that connection. Cats and dogs suffering will increase your views. Good clickbait. If you freaking think that was clickbait, where you have to sit through an hour, you don't understand what clickbait is. It wasn't in a thumbnail. I wasn't enticing people to watch my video. I'm trying to report the reality of a war here, and I will damn well put that in there to give you a sense of the reality of this war. And I will show the faces of people who have died. And if you think that's clickbait, you can take a long walk off a short pier. Like, yeah, I would criticize me when it's bona fide criticism, right? Fair enough. You can pick where I get things wrong or where I say the wrong thing. Whatever, Bertold, you can do that. But if you say that what I do is clickbait, when it's at the end of an hour video and you have to have watched the video for an hour, it is literally not clickbait. It is indeed the opposite of clickbait. It is long, watch a whole video, and then you've already watched it, so you can't click it because you've already watched it bait. As you can tell, I'm annoyed. Please continue to criticize me, Bertold, but do it in sensible ways. Right. So we're going on to other bits and pieces. Russia, the Kremlin's main state bank has announced the beginning of a recession in the Russian economy. Wow. So we could be getting some formal recognition that Russia is either in or about to be in a recession. Then we hear the news that Tulsi Gabbard exposed, when she took away the clearance of those 37 people associated with Russia and Russian analysis, she exposed those names of the people. Turns out that one of them was not only a CIA officer, but one who worked in Russia. And this comes on the heels of terminating a CIA officer and Russian expert right after Trump's meeting with Putin in Alaska. Open your effing eyes, America, says John Jackson. So US cheat. So Tulsi Gabbard outed an American spy. She didn't realize. This is how freaking amateur she is, or how pro-Russian she is. US intelligence chief reveals the name of a CIA officer who worked undercover in Russia. Like, that is not cool. So she releases the name and the letter on Twitter because that's how you do diplomacy and that's how you do politics these days. Everything is just through True Social or Twitter. Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence in the US, has publicly revealed the name of a senior CIA officer who worked undercover in Russia, according to Wall Street Journal, citing sources familiar with the matter. The officer's name was included in a list of 37 current and former officials whose security clearances Gabbard revoked. She published a list on the social media platform X on August the 19th. Most individuals on the list either participated in intelligence assessments related to Russia's attempts to influence the 2016 US presidential election or signed a 2019 letter calling for the impeachment of Donald Trump. Quote, an intelligence director of national intelligence, an intelligence would have consulted with the CIA before identifying an undercover officer. This could potentially jeopardize CIA cover procedures. It would also threaten relationships with foreign governments, told. That was the Wall Street Journal quote from CIA Chief of Staff Larry Pfeiffer. Gabbard stated that she acted on Trump's instructions, arguing that the officials, quote, breached trust and politicized, manipulated, or facilitated the leaking of classified information. You know, whatever the reason for revoking those clearances, you don't advertise whose clearances you revoked if they are people in those sensitive roles or having been in those sensitive roles. That's jeopardizing their life, and it's jeopardizing the life of people connected to them in Russia. You know, it's just, oh my goodness. Then we hear, as I reported yesterday, that Russians were deported back to Russia from the US, and these are people who had escaped Russia because of the war and may well have been dissidents and whatnot. So Chris Owicki has a thread on this. Russian refugees deported by the United States back to Russia have experienced intensive interrogation, threats, violence and torture. According to Russian sources, thousands of Russians have fled to the US to escape the war and political persecution by the Putin regime. On the 27th of August, 50 Russians were deported from the US to Russia, including dozens of asylum seekers, according to Dmitry Valuev. They comprised Russian citizens who were in immigration prisons in the United States who had lost asylum cases or chose self-deportation. The Russian human rights activist Vladimir Osechkin reports, quote, a plane with a convoy of Egyptian special services at Cairo airport, American ICE officers handed the Russians over to Egyptians for subsequent transfer to Russia, arrived at Domodedovo airport where dozens of Russian special services were already waiting for the deportees. A source for Galugu.net reports that all those forcibly deported from the United States to the airport were put through filtration, hours of interrogation using pressure, threats, and for some violence and special means. Almost all of those who returned were presumed by the FSB and Interior Ministry operatives to cooperate. Interrogated about the reasons for their trip to the US and details of their detention and placement in detention, requests for political asylum and the functioning of US services, ICE, FBI, Justice Department, courts, lawyers, human rights activists, and forced to provide information about flight neighbours, snitching. Following the filtering, some were released on the condition of cooperating. Others, who are not of operational interest at the moment, on the condition of participating in a propaganda campaign against the US or the West, participation in talk shows, interviews, etc., with the purpose of advertising a return to the Russian Federation. But a number of men and women were detained for subsequent transfer to temporary detention facilities and pre-trial detention centres, including those who had previously served in the Russian armed forces and refused to take part in the war against Ukraine. So this is essentially what the US has done is arguably illegal. I mean, it goes against refugee. It depends what they're signed up to be honest. I know in the US probably not a lot. But this kind of goes against like the whole nature of, you know, seeking asylum and refugee status, sending them right back into the lion's den. The source reports that torture, violence and special means were used against a number of individuals and threats were made to commit violent acts against them in a perverted form and send them, quote, to zero in the special military operations. So they're going to be sent to the front line, some of them, to the occupied territories of Ukraine to participate in the war. The war in Ukraine and the Russian government's persecutions of political opponents and LGBT people have caused a large increase in the number of Russians applying for asylum in the US. Figures have increased from 10,000 in 2021 to 36,000 in 2022 to 57,000 in 2023 and include anti-war activists, opposition figures, LGBT people who have faced persecution and men who have either deserted from the Russian army or are evading mobilization. The latter seem to have prompted security concerns in the US, leading leading to the mass detention of Russians crossing the border from Mexico and seeking asylum. Many were detained under the Biden administration. Some have sued to be released. Now, under Trump, Russian refugees are being deported despite a clear threat to their lives. Vladimir Oshechkin reports that 7 changes have already been brought against the deportees for offences, 7 charges, ranging from cooperation with undesirable organisations to high treason. As Oshechkin puts it, what these people told ICE officers as well as in court is confirmed and is becoming a nightmare in reality. End quote. The deportations indicate that the Trump administration is ignoring both US and international law in relation to the protection of refugees. That's what I was referencing. They appear to violate the principle of non-refoulement, a fundamental principle of international law, forbidding a country from deporting individuals to a country where their life or freedom would be threatened on account of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion. The US Immigration and Nationality Act specifically prohibits the removal of someone who has not been granted asylum but shows that their life or freedom would be threatened because of certain characteristics if they were sent back to their country of origin. So interesting thread there, and I think that is thoroughly problematic. These people are in danger. Their lives are in danger by being sent back to the Russian Federation. Now, I talked last night very early this morning in my Geopolitics update about USAID funding being stopped and USAID essentially being closed, and Marco Rubio giving what's left of it over to Russell Vought from the Heritage Foundation. Sean Pinner, who I've interviewed a number of times, he is a former prisoner of war and now sort of campaigns and fundraisers and whatnot. He says Trump told Congress he'll rescind nearly $5 billion in foreign aid, slashing USAID and peacekeeping, according to Bloomberg. Since his inauguration, I've watched him pull out at the stitching that holds fragile communities together. My wife and friends lost jobs overnight when Trump and Musk recklessly cut foreign aid, so his wife is Ukrainian. Projects that keep Ukraine's towns alive collapsed. People were too scared to speak out, but devastated. Audits, fine. Oversight, fine. But cutting everything was a gift to Moscow, and not the only one. This isn't incompetence. It's another in a long line of what is a clear strategy. Trump's administration isn't just echoing Biden's escalation caution. It's complicit in aiding Russia in achieving its goals. Europe, wake up. And he then shows you the letter talking about USAID funding there for $5 billion being sort of rescinded. But at the same time, people like this are calling for his Nobel Peace Prize.
Do you think that the Nobel Peace Prize Committee people will actually come around? Or at some point, I guess maybe they need him more than he needs them?
Most certainly, if the Nobel Peace Prize Committee knows what's good for them, they do the right thing and nominate him. But also, too, I think that Melania Trump might also have a nomination. I think that she's been very instrumental in discussions with Russia. And also, too, I think that she's going to be a key reason why we're able to broker peace with Ukraine.
I love that. They could be the first joint couple to earn the Nobel Peace Prize.
I love that. It's all about Nobel Peace Prize nominations and winning. It's all just it makes me feel sick. He's a guy that doesn't care one iota for Ukrainians and their deaths, because otherwise he would have changed the way he's done things completely, and he would have stood up to Putin. But he keeps appeasing Putin, and Putin keeps killing Ukrainian civilians day after day, night after night. You know, that should invalidate a Nobel Peace Prize nomination. And yet, you know, these elected representatives from the GOP just still acting like they're in North Korea or something. Right, just to let you know, and the link's not working. My usual atpgeo.com/donate's not working. I need to get Benny onto that, Benny Pie onto that, but he's otherwise busy at the moment. So the link should be in the description below to the video for our new campaign to raise money for some Car for Ukraine vehicles. The goal is for 2 vehicles, 22,000 euros. When we can do that, if we can do that, that'd be absolutely fantastic. Autumn Harvest, ATP Geopolitics, this is one with a number of other, as per normal, a number of other channels. More will no doubt come on board. We've got Sukhamimus Eastern Border, Tanya Fiona, ATP Geopolitics, Soy Pill, Shills, Rex's Hanger, Baba Yaga Fella. And if you go onto ATP Geopolitics, then you can help us out by fundraising for this campaign to get some vehicles out to the troops who need them most. Anyway, that's enough from me, guys. Take care. Speak soon. Toodle pips. I have to go and take my son to football. Speaking of football, this came up on my Facebook earlier today. Look, this is me with the FA Cup. I wonder if my son could ever win that. I doubt it. I didn't win that. It just came to town. Me and Mrs. With the FA Cup. I had a bit more hair then. Not a lot more. Hey ho. Anyway, take care. Speak soon.